Hey buddy, it's Carm here. I'm back to do something I've been meaning to do for quite a while. I guess kind of a by request thing for a dear friend who'd asked for it a while ago. Actually, I mentioned wanting to do it eventually, and they were kind of like, come on, gently prodding me. My dear friend Shannon, who many of you know, and so this goes out to her, as well as dear friend and sister Ambi. Sister A. Also, I know likes this album and this artist. And it's Pat Metheny's Secret Story. A very, very deeply personal album to me. At one time was my favorite album in the universe for at least a good solid year, or good portion of second half of high school. Solo album of his. A very large scale solo album from 1992. It was recorded over a period from 91 and 92. He was there at the time. And then the group, the Pat Metheny group, which of course was his group for quite some time, they were on I think a bit of a hiatus then. And they were doing other projects between the different members of the groups. And I think Letter from Home was the last thing they had done as far as a studio album. And not long after this, they did come out with a live album and then started making studio ones a little more regularly. But this was something, I guess, had been in gestation for a while for Pat. And it is a huge work for him. His solo albums at the time were usually much smaller. There would be trio albums. Trying out different instrumentation, different textures and approaches. Did some early solo albums, or a couple of just him alone. But on here he has a huge cast of characters. There's members of the group themselves. Lyle's on here, Lyle Mays, Steve Rodby, bass, Paul Wertico, drums, and others. But Charlie Hayden is on here on bass, Nana Vasconcelos on percussion. Kiko Yano, if you're familiar with her, she was on here. Steve Ferrone drums. It goes on and on. Toots Thielmans, harmonica player. So I bought this when it was fairly new at the time. I think it was beginning of my junior year of high school, so that would have been the 92-93 school year. And I'd been a fan of his for him in the group since about 91. Summer of 91 I started really getting into their stuff overall. And in some ways it's difficult to talk about because it's that time of high school. You're meeting certain people the first time, experiencing high school crushes and all that, and this is very much part of that that time. So a lot of memories come up, both more tangible and fuzzier, but still powerful and prominent in a certain way. Kind of like a trail, vapor trail in a way, that just kind of stays with you throughout, over 30 years now. But Secret Story, Pat Metheny. Starting in the first piece, Above the Treetops. It's based on a traditional Cambodian song, Buang Song. Can't really pronounce it, but on here he actually has members of a Cambodian choir, and it sounds very much like the title, slowly, almost in kind of like a kind of slow motion above a forest, above a canopy. Voices are slowly coming in. It sounds like a children's choir. Just very kind of stark, sparse, very pointed. Very elegant as well. And then Pat's own guitar coming in, acoustic playing. Very kind of simple single note melodies, just blending really beautifully with the voices. Again, a kind of elegant simplicity to it, but also slightly otherworldly. He had recorded music with a lot of different influences, from like Latin America and a little bit of the East in there, mixed in. But this is something so thoroughly, there, just a real east meets west, and a very short piece, under 3 minutes. But a real nice introduction, kind of what you're going to hear, an indicator as far as the diversity of the album overall, and just all the different approaches that you wanted to take on one project. Next up, Facing West, among my favorite pieces on the album. This takes us a very sharp turn, but also a very pleasant one as well. You're down from the treetops, and we've reached land, and now we've really hit the road. Really on horseback is what I imagine. Just you imagine the hooves kind of ambling along, and just a wide open plain, maybe some mountains in the distance, but just accelerating, but a very easy pace as well. And Pat on here plays a multitude of instruments, and in addition all his different guitars, bass, as well as various keyboards. There's also orchestra on just about all the pieces as well. Members of the London Orchestra conducted by Jeremy Lubbock. But a lot of it, a lot of what's being heard is Pat himself playing these instruments. And you hear the familiar keyboard, almost kind of whistling sound. Lila's on this piece too, on piano, although I think Pat's playing that part, that very familiar kind of high-end whistling keyboard, which kind of leads you through that hitting the road. Very upbeat, very sunny piece, very optimistic, and you could tell the adventure is really beginning now. It started off a little more meditatively, and now it's official. We're on the road and we're really going. Next piece, Cathedral in a Suitcase, is an interesting piece. It's almost like these kind of woodsy sounds, like keyboard sounds. I hadn't really heard from him before, almost like little wood blocks, but in a being done by a synthesizer. Sounds more like the traveling, is starting to slow down a little bit, and you're starting to take in the sights a little more. The terrain is becoming a little bit more varied as you're coming along, and you're just kind of imagining what's up ahead in this very long journey. On here you also have some voice from Mark Ledford, who had been playing with the group for some time, Pat Metheny group, lending wordless vocals. These very kind of soulful cries of almost slightly ecstatic, like just very excited about the journey, about what's up ahead. Danny Gottlieb is on here doing a cymbal roll at times. Of course, he was the drummer for the first incarnation of the Metheny group back in late 70s, early 80s. So he's on here as well as a part of the history as it's kind of unfolding. Next piece, Finding and Believing, kind of comes in a similar way. You have more members of the group on here: Steve Rodby, Paul Wertico, Armando Marsal on percussion, Willie on bass. This piece is it's kind of more of an anthemic. I'd read something years later, actually a review of this, saying it was kind of quite overblown and even preposterous, but I really feel he was using all these different elements, in a really creative way. Not just creative, but I think it was really in some ways the opposite of overblown. He found a way to use them very resourcefully and place each instrument, each aspect in just the right place. So it had the potential to be overblown, but I never felt it was. But kind of everything is thrown into the pot here, but again in such a way that's very expressive, rather than overblown. The next piece is one of my favorites of his in general, called The Longest Summer, and I think it might have been maybe the one piece on here that actually had a music video that would show on VH1 way back when. It starts in with Pat himself on piano. It sounds like this point in the journey it's very reflective. He's kind of maybe looking back on things. Really very much like a ballad. both in tone and pacing. Very romantic. I think it was about, may have been even been about unrequited love in a sense. I think even the video, if I remember, kind of indicated that. But there's a point where his guitar synthesizer comes on, which is the most, I mean, over 30 years later, it still tugs at the heart. I mean, it's so effusive, and makes no bones about the feeling. I mean, the true feeling really comes through that instrument, that kind of high keening, otherworldly timbre of his guitar synthesizer playing, and it just keeps. There's a point where it goes back to kind of an interlude, a short piano, and then it comes back in again, even more powerful, and it's almost heart-wrenching in a way, but very compelling and very just keeps drawing you in. And it's the first time I'd heard that instrument quite a few times before that, but this is the first time it just really bowled me over. And again, especially with what life was like at that time, going through high school and relationships and everything, and that piece was really sustaining during that time, as well as I think a year after that it was harder to listen to the album for a while, and especially that piece, just because of that emotional intensity. But but still, it's an incredible piece, very deep, The Longest Summer. And then you have Sunlight, number 6, which goes again in another different, totally other direction, kind of leaving that reverie behind, and now we've hit the road again, kind of in a similar vein as Facing West. It's very bright, and we're now we're leaving that behind and going on to new pastures. And again, most of the same lineup on here. Pat's kind of pulling out all the stops as ever with all the different instruments. Next up, Rain River, number 7, another one of my favorite pieces. Now this is where it feels like we're finally at nighttime, or at least darkness is approaching. Not so much in a foreboding way, but more of a kind of mysterioso way. Where this is much new. This is a much different place than we've been. And on here, Pat, as well as guitars, electric sitar, which it's been kind of a trademark of his since the last train home, which is very much you could hear a little bit of that influence in here as well. What I really like on here is Steve Rodney's bass, anchoring the whole thing. But it does sound like, you imagine being like by a creek or a small waterfall, but kind of coming down in slow motion, but as the sun is setting and getting darker and darker, but you're just being drawn further and further down that path. Really a beautiful, evocative piece. It's one of those pieces that's, I think out of all of this whole album, it's one of the pieces that I find running through my head, almost like in an earwormy way. But when you hear it, it doesn't seem that obvious, but it's how my strange brain works, I guess. The kind of things that stay with you. I would mention another thing about Pat's playing in general, but especially on this album. He's the only person I know of who plays, for me at least, one of the few who plays guitar solos in which the solos themselves are like earworms. The way certain lyrics might stick in your head or certain melodies. I'm able to memorize his solos, his patterns, just from like fragments of these songs. And I don't know of many other people who can really do that, or have done that for me, or it connects with me in that way. But that's prominent on there as well. Next up, we have Always and Forever. Going back to a ballad. Sounds like we're going further into the night and further into reflection. And on here you have Toots Thielemans on harmonica, which, a funny thing was, in a sense, this was my real introduction to Toots. It's been said, if you've heard certain themes, I think Sesame Street, he played the theme to that, as well as a host of other things. So it's one of those players, you've heard him whether you know it or not. But the first time knowing I heard him was on that song. And again, it's a heart-wrenching in a way. His playing, it's so searing and so heartfelt, and beautifully blended with Pat's own guitar on acoustic on this one, as well as Charlie Hayden on bass, beautifully anchoring everything. You know, if you know Charlie's playing, I mean, he could make one note sound like it's like coming across a mountain for the first time. You know, it's so large and so beautiful, but yet it's just gorgeous. Just the one tone, you know, played beautifully is all you need. And of course with the strings, which again are on most of, I think just about all the songs, it's sweeping without being grandiose, and it just, yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. Great introduction to Toots if you hadn't heard him before in this context. And now number 9 is See the World. I should mention too that Pat pretty much writes all the songs. They're all his pieces for the most part. So, and this one you kind of going back to vintage Metheny group territory, kind of what they were doing the previous years with Still Life Talking and Letter from Home. Having most of the group here. I don't think Lyle is on this one, although Pat plays the keyboard parts. And on here you have a horn section as well, being used more like, interestingly enough, the way they would use the keyboards for orchestration. You know, kind of taking that place. So it's interesting hearing those bright brassy timbres, you know, where the keyboards would normally be. But on here it's kind of hitting the road again. It's morning. It's first thing in the morning, first light. But we're not slowly easing into the day. We're just jumping right into it, and beautiful and inspiring. You know, very upbeat, and yeah, and very much in the mold of the group. Now the next piece, number 10, As a Flower Blossoms, subtitled I Am Running to You, has a Kiko Yano on there, which was my introduction to her without years before actually getting into her music and knowing who she was. And it's all she also gets co-writing credits with this. Her voice in this kind of very soft, whispery, almost kind of like, not exactly like a come hither, but kind of slightly seductive, but also almost like a secret. You know, you have a secret to tell, and you know, you have to kind of come closer to really hear it, or we have to, you know, little by little they're letting you know what it is, revealing it to you. Maybe that's part of, you know, the album as a whole with the theme of Secret Story. But it sounds like it kind of culminates. You know, it's another quiet, reflective moment, and we're just going to pause here for that possibility of revealing something. Also, Nana Vasconcelos is on here on percussion, playing very light, almost transparently. You know he's there, but it's again kind of keeping with that theme of being a little more discreet. And Pat's on piano as well as a Picasso guitar, so having that very kind of high-end sound. Yeah, it's bright yet somehow dark. Nice mixture of those. Next up, Antonia, the 11th piece. Pat playing a synclavier accordion. And this piece does, in keeping kind of with the tradition of the accordion in a way, it's kind of a waltz-like feel to it. But again, only as he can do it, you know, kind of filtered through his very, you know, particular vision. You know, very slowly building up. Toots is also on this piece, you know, playing a little more subtly, discreetly in the back. And you have Danny Gottlieb as well as Paul Wertko playing on this piece. And again, the strings kind of underlying everything. And it just keeps kind of, for the rest of the album really, it kind of stays more in this vein, a little more reflective, reflecting on maybe the trip as a whole, you know, this whole voyage that he's been on, you know, what sounds like, you know, self-exploration and life in general, you know, what it kind of led up to that point. The Truth Will Always Be, the 12th piece, and I think the longest one, a little over 9 minutes. This piece to me really sounds almost like it could be an extension or a cousin or, you know, a sibling of sorts to Are You Going With Me? if you know that piece from Off Ramp, which might have been in a sense the first hit song for them, Pat Metheny group, and it also introduced the guitar synthesizer, I think, in a wider way, compositionally, and just the way he kind of paints the whole composition. On here it starts in with kind of almost like these very low, deep bell-like tones, very slow, very gradually, kind of merging with the strings, and slowly, very, very gradually building up in a very quiet intensity, dark, slightly foreboding, but with a romanticism, a subtle romanticism. But it just keeps building slower and slower and slower until it culminates with almost like a bursting of rain, in a way, is how I hear it. Very large, heavy raindrops, and then Pat's guitar synthesizer comes in with such an intensity and such an emotionality that it's I don't know. The first time I heard it, I was just breathtaking, for me personally, and still hearing it now, it's just. I mean, he's all over the place on that piece, just with his playing, with everything else just steadily, just kind of circling around him, but keeping him grounded in a sense. But it's very intense, intensely beautiful. Yeah, the truth will always be. And then number 13, tell her you saw me. It's mostly strings with Pat's guitar. Very kind of winding down, and that kind of reflection. Maybe it's bedtime now, and reflecting upon the day, but you're exhausted, but you're still kind of reveling in everything. But also a certain melancholy is coming. Maybe you're thinking about again something like unrequited love, or maybe even regrets to some degree. But there's still something of an acknowledgement of that moment, a celebration of those moments as well. Just a contrast of those emotions, maybe showing that they can really coexist, and they're meant to be together. But that's at least what I get from it, even after all these years. And the final piece, kind of an extension of that, not to be forgotten, our final hour, is just the orchestra. Pat's not playing on that, and it just kind of trails off like the wake of a ship, just kind of slowly leaving it all behind. But yeah, that's the 14 pieces of a secret story. Again, I don't know. As I always say, I'm never sure. Maybe I've said a lot without really conveying much of anything. But it's an album that's I've lived with for such a long time, and gone back to it various times. Again, times where it was so difficult to listen to it because it hits you so hard in different ways, emotionally, and just the way it brought back certain memories, and sort of just the reflections of those years. But it stood the test of time for me, that it's just so good. It's so beautifully done, and it's such a personal statement from him. To me, you hear it in every note. And again, those notions of it being overblown or preposterous, I think is really just is his expression, his deep expression, just transcends all that to me. And if you're a fan of his and you're not aware of this one, definitely recommend. And even if it's the kind of thing you think you wouldn't like, again with the orchestra and all the instrumentation and all the concepts being kind of thrown together, definitely it's worth a try. So yeah, Pat Metheny's Secret Story, 1992. Album happy to revisit, and always be a part of my life and my heart. I think for the next, if I'm still here in 30 years, it'll still will be. So yeah, again, goes out to Shannon and to Ambi and anyone else who's a fan. So yeah. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see what comes next. And until the next one, peace, love, and joy.